One of the things that I struggled with in my divorce were what I call the old tapes playing through my head. Things from childhood, things from society that continue to swirl around again and again. Things like, you're a failure, you're not good enough, nobody will ever want you, no one will ever pay attention to you again. Well, my guest today is Sharon Mosley. She is a therapist and an expert on women's issues. So listen in while Sharon and I talk about these old tapes and what we can do about them. Listen in. Hi, beautiful. I'm so glad you're here with me today. And I'm just so excited because my guest today is Sharon Mosley, and she's a mental health therapist. And boy, do I have lots of questions for her. She's a licensed clinical mental health counselor supervisor, and she has over 20 years of experience. So she certainly has enough experience to talk with us today. She's currently licensed to practice in North Carolina and Arizona, and she's the owner of the Fit Talk, where she offers counseling and health coaching services to individuals and groups. She has experience providing individual, family, and group therapy for those struggling with a variety of mental health issues, including the terrible anxiety and depression, and that happens so often in divorce. And she also holds a health coach certification, and she is committed to healthier living and believes that one of the best ways to approach it is to walk and talk your therapy. So I'm so excited to have her today. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining me. It's so good to have you.
Hi, Beverly. Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is really exciting. And to give the listeners a little background is that in my coaching, so many of my clients were working through the emotions of divorce. What I find is that those emotions may be tied to something that's happening right now, but they frequently are also tied to something in their past, an experience in their childhood or something in their past. And when I try and contrast what a therapist does and what a divorce coach does, I see the therapist as working with issues in the past and very specifically focused traumas, domestic violence, childhood issues, those kinds of things. And a divorce coach is really future focused and kind of goal setting approach. So that's why I wanted so badly to have Sharon come today, because of this commonality where these emotions seem to come up from nowhere. So, Sharon, can you just elaborate a little bit on this concept of what is meant when you say that our past can resurface during divorce?
Absolutely. Beverly, I think you raised some really, really valid points with that. That oftentimes what's happening is when we experience something as, dramatic and traumatizing as experiencing a divorce, is that there are some issues that for some of us, we may felt as though that they had been dealt with or resolved. But as it turns out, when you experience a divorce, you realize they haven't, and they resurface again. You could say that there is a trigger. And so those could be those emotions that you start feeling, or those could be those stated or implied things that occur in terms of you may start to feel a little helpless or worthless or dismissed, or you may also feel as though there isn't any point to any of this. My life doesn't have much meaning without this person, because what happens is sometimes early on in life, we have been told those things or they have been implied. And so again, for some people, it may have felt as though those issues had been resolved, or they may not have been resolved, and then they resurface during something like a divorce.
Absolutely. And I found that in my particular case, some of my past issues were low self-worth, low self-esteem, that the only way I was good was by getting attention. And so those things also drove me to the very person I married that then I divorced from, that if I had really stepped back, had I done the healing work, and had I been able to look at logically what I wanted in that ideal person, I probably shouldn't have even married him in the first place. So I really struggle with that. And that's another reason this topic is so important to me. And I think you really hit the nail on the head, because so many women, that in particular those that have been married a good while, kind of have this identity of wife, right? And that's who they are. And when divorce comes, that label goes away. And so what happens to them?
When they find themselves in a situation like that and they no longer have that identity, well, before they even reach the point of actual divorce, when they feel like that's where things are headed, sometimes it can trigger these anxious thoughts. Well, what will I do? And also, when you have someone that is in your home that is saying to you, you're not going to make it without me. What will you do without me? You can't do anything without me. And so when you have to have that on repeat, then it really, you start to buy into it and you start to believe it and you start to think, well, he's right. What will I do? I can't do anything. Maybe I need to stay. And you start to second guess yourself. And so because this is the one title that you're very comfortable with, and that is that of being a wife. And that's something that you feel that you know. And so it can leave a really big gap.
Hi, everyone. As parents, we often have gut feelings when something just isn't right. And this can be especially true in co-parenting arrangements where one parent is struggling with addiction. If you're co-parenting with an ex who abuses alcohol, SoberLink can help. SoberLink's alcohol monitoring system is the most convenient, reliable, and reasonable way for a parent to provide evidence that they are not drinking during parenting time. The system's real-time alerts, facial recognition, and tamper detection ensure the integrity of each test, so you can be confident your kids are with a sober parent. With SoberLink, judges rest assured that your child is safe. Attorneys get court-admissible evidence of sobriety, and your kids are able to maintain healthy relationships with both parents. To sign up, SoberLink's offering $50 off your device for our listeners. Visit www.soberlink.com/empowered, and that will be in the show notes as well.
And so then you have to, think about, and I think this is really where you come in, Beverly, is to start thinking about the future. Well, what does my future look like? What kind of future in life can I have after the divorce? And we know that you can be very prosperous and have a fulfilling life after a divorce. But those are the questions that come up. And I think sometimes as a therapist, we have to deal with what is that question is rooted in, because often that question is rooted in something from childhood or some earlier experiences. And what happens with this partner is that they just come along and reinforce whatever that is. On the surface, it appears when you first probably meet and early on in the marriage that this person will compliment you and take you away from all of that. But what you start to find out later is the thing that leads to divorce sometimes is that actually what they're doing is reinforcing that very thing that you were trying to get away from.
Exactly. Oh, so true. So true. I'm thinking of many women that I talk to seem to be dealing with a lot of emotional and verbal abuse, just like you said, people putting them down. One client I had today told me that after she told her husband that she wanted a divorce, he told her nobody would want her. She wasn't good enough. She would be a single mother with 2 kids and nobody's going to want that. Tell me a little bit about how that triggers things.
Mm-hmm. Because again, oftentimes that's something that they've heard earlier in life, is that, look at you. Who would want you? What are you going to do? Or also, it could have been something that was modeled for them in a relationship that they saw. So oftentimes, the very first relationships that we experience is that of our parents. Whether that is a healthy or unhealthy relationship is our very first experience with what relationships look like. So if you are the product of an unhealthy relationship, or you saw one of your parents involved in an unhealthy relationship, we start to get the idea that this is what it looks like. So that oftentimes can be where it stems from. And when we hear that in our own relationships, we can buy into that thought. And we start to go back to that time and think about what that relationship was like for those people. And maybe they decided to stay for a length of time. And so we may think that, well, then we have to just stay and just stick it out. Or maybe that's what we were actually told. Well, once you get married, you stick it out. You do it for the good of the kids, or you do it because you need a home and financial stability. And so we sometimes buy into that.
Right. I think that is so true. So many people say that even though they're miserable, they're not going to get a divorce because they're staying together for the kids. But I don't think they are thinking about what messages they are sending to the kids if that home is miserable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that sometimes it isn't in the kids' best interest to stay in that family unit intact.
That's a very good point, because kids are really perceptive, right? Like they understand whether you tell them or not. They clearly see what's happening in the environment around them. They understand more than what we give them credit for what's happening in your relationship. And so that does weigh on them and also it has an impact. Even when you mentioned earlier, Beverly, about having the low self-esteem, right, and low self-worth. Well, oftentimes the other argument is that, well, this marriage will provide me financial stability. And so I don't have the skill set or to do these things without my spouse. So we don't give ourselves enough credit for all the things that we can do and the skills that we do have and what we actually bring to the table. And also we discount when we walk away or step away from this marriage, and this will go into the legal side of things, that we can get other supports and resources in terms of attorneys to help find out what exactly will I be entitled to. So I think that, again, we don't give ourselves enough credit.
Yeah, I think there's a perfect example that I see a lot, and that revolves around finances. And it's women that feel like they don't understand math or numbers or finances, so they turn everything over to their husband. And in doing that, kind of reinforces that they don't know. Maybe they were taught when they were younger, girls aren't good at math and boys are, or something. And what sometimes results from that is financial abuse, where the person that had complete control did things that the spouse was totally unaware of because they gave him total control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's certainly it. I have a quick question for you that I'm just curious about, and it doesn't really have to do with past issues, but I see all of these initials, LCSW, and I hear MSW, and I hear licensed psychotherapist, and all these names. If I need to work on deep past issues, let's say self-worth, self-esteem, who should I turn to, and who are these different people?
Very good question, right? Because that's like an alphabet soup, and it can be confusing.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, so when it comes to my credentials, I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. That can be used interchangeably with someone who is a licensed professional counselor. Someone who is a licensed clinical counselor. So we have all had basically the same training, but we may hail from different states. And based on their state board, they may have a slightly different name, but we have probably had basically the exact same curriculum. So that comes down to just kind of semantics. So then you also have MSWs. Those are with a master's degree. And by the way, we all have to have at least a master's degree in order to be licensed. And so then you have a MSW, which is a master's in social work. But if it doesn't have the L on it, then they're not licensed to practice as a therapist. They are still social workers, but they're not practicing as licensed therapists. So if they have the L on it, they can do that. And they will be doing basically the same things as the other alphabets that I just mentioned. Then you also have the psychologists. Psychologists, again, they will do the same things as the other alphabets. Now, what the difference is with the psychologist, someone that is a, say, clinical psychologist, not only are they doing therapy, and psychotherapy and therapy are used interchangeably, but a licensed psychologist may also do testing. So if you have a need for testing for, let's say, for learning disabilities or for autism or something like that, then we may refer you to the psychologist just for the testing portion, but they could also do therapy also. So a licensed social worker, their curriculum is really steeped in family systems. And so when they were originally founded, it was around the idea of sort of like case management, case work, and connecting systems. And so that's something that they do really well, but they can also do therapy. As it relates to licensed professional counselors, licensed clinical counselors, and licensed clinical mental health counselors, then our curriculum is based on theories of counseling and theoretical approaches. So again, we can all do the therapy, but those may be the slight differences.
Gotcha. So, and licensed also means that they are attached to a state. Like you said, you're attached to practice in North Carolina and Arizona. So that's what your licenses are.
Yes. Okay. And we do not practice across state lines unless you are a psychologist that is a part of the psych pack, which you can practice across certain state lines, but you have to be a part of that. Now, my credential, we are in the process of having a compact that will start at the beginning of 2024. We will be able to practice across state lines with other states that are part of the compact if we apply to be a part of the compact as individuals. So,
wow.
And that's because there's such a shortage in the U.S. with therapists across the board. So that's what's happening. As far as medication is concerned, you will need then to see an MD, which would be your practitioner, your general practitioner, or a psychiatrist. Gotcha. They specialize in mental health, but they can also prescribe.
Gotcha. Fascinating. What do you say to someone that, let's say, has been in therapy for a number of years and they go, gosh, I dealt with all that back then. I dealt with my mother. I dealt with those messages. And all of a sudden it's coming up out of nowhere. Why is that? What do you say to that person?
Okay. I will say it's just like when you first learn how to acquire a skill, you learn how to, let's say you learn how to swim when you were younger. And then you spent, 20, 30 years out of the pool, and you got back in and you started thinking, oh, I can still swim, but I've lost some of my skill set here. So maybe I need a refresher because, I need to get back to this again. So it's the same thing. You can deal with something early on in life, but what has happened is over time you change. And when you change, then you may need to deal with that again, or it may rear its head again because things have changed. And that's okay, because whatever your needs were and whatever your abilities were when you were a preteen will be different than your needs and abilities when you are an older adult, or even when you are someone in your 20s. So that's okay, because you are at a different phase of life now. And so you have to address different needs.
Absolutely. I'd like to think of it too as almost like peeling layers of an onion.
Mm-hmm.
That there's certain issues that go very deep that my mind and my spirit are only capable of handling so much at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like I've resolved it.
Yes.
But then a little bit of time goes by and all of a sudden it's coming up again, deeper and deeper.
Yes.
And I can absolutely totally understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about some of the messages that were sent that were growing up that might affect us in marriage and divorce. Can you share any others that come to mind? Any past messages? I like to call them old tapes that are playing that you can think of. I know one that used to come up to me a lot was, I'm a failure. That one would come up a lot.
Many people feel divorce is a death sentence, but with the right support and guidance, you can move through the process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. It can also be a time of growth and progress. As a divorce and empowerment coach, I'm an invaluable member of your divorce team. I help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, learn skills to help you communicate and negotiate, find your true voice, and create an empowered life post-divorce. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that will certainly resonate, because those are some of the old tapes that do tend to come back again. You know, that I'm a failure, that I really don't matter, that, my life has little meaning, that it's my fault. That's a big one. Somehow this is my fault. Because if it was not for you, if it weren't for you, then we could have done X, Y, and Z, and so sometimes the guilt of something that really isn't your fault can come back, something that probably it was not stated that it was your fault, but maybe you interpret this as being your fault. Yeah. Something occurred with another family member, and you carry that guilt around forever, that somehow